I have an enormous amount of gratitude to be standing here speaking today. And I just want to recognize also the privilege that I have and my position to be able to do this work. It's hard work, and I recognize that there are those in our society that might not be able to have the chance to do what I have done and to be where I am. So with that, I'd like to share my story. And I'm very empathetic and emotional, and so here it goes. As a child, I developed at a young age symptoms called Tourette syndrome. And that, I'll get myself together here. Tourette syndrome, which is involuntary neurological movements and vocalizations that happen repeatedly. They can get exhausting and socially awkward and life-altering in a way. That's not really where my story really begins, but that's a part of the experience. So the treatment suggested from what's the name? Neurologist, was a treatment that was common and remains common for children, which is treatment with antipsychotic medications. So I began taking antipsychotic medications, Orap first, and then when complications came, I started to take Risperdal, which is a medication that is used to treat schizophrenia and other severe states of consciousness, I guess, or heightened states of consciousness. The treatment involved with Risperdal for Tourette syndrome is that it blocks your dopamine levels, which is what causes your ticking in the Tourette syndrome. And so the side effect of psychiatric medication treated my Tourette syndrome. But what also happened is it changed my life in a way that I could only, probably you could only experience for yourself. But what I want to do is share a little bit about what it felt like, how I stopped taking Risperdal, and how I regained a sense of self and purpose and of who I was, who I am. I started to feel quite inherently broken once I started to take medications for my Tourette's. And while they did help the tics at the very beginning, the changes that I experienced overall were quite dramatic. My ability to feel any normal range of emotions ceased to be there. It was like having my own cloud, my own very dark and gray cloud, and it followed me everywhere. And it wasn't that I was not functioning. I actually functioned very well. I learned how to mimic things that were expected of me socially, and in certain situations, I excelled in school. I did well. I had friends. I had speed bumps, and I struggled, but I maintained a level of functioning that would be perceived as normal, which I have absolutely learned to deal with in a much more appropriate way. And so I guess the real change happened for me when I went to university at age 23 and I studied social work, and I began to question a lot of things about what I believed about what I believed about the world. Okay, sure. And so in the questioning, I started to understand how we behave socially a little bit, and what anchors our collective beliefs. And I asked myself, what kind of a life did I want for myself? Because of my experience, what I thought of myself was very, very superficial. I didn't quite feel like I was really a part of this. I was limited. I've tried to find ways to describe the experience of not being a part of this. It's like being in a movie that you know you're a part of, but you're not in it. You're watching it instead. And so a lot of feelings started to come up when I started to understand the way society works. And I decided to stop taking Risperdal, and I did in 2009. And I'm talking probably longer than I should. But obviously, I was crafting an identity that I wasn't necessarily that familiar with, and it wasn't a whole sense of who I was. And so materialism was a big deal. It was my tool to be perceived and to participate in a way that emulated the behavior that others had that I just couldn't quite grasp. I couldn't get my hands on it. I couldn't figure it out. It was a puzzle that I dealt with every day. And I should admit also that Tourette syndrome used to be considered a part of the spectrum, which is now uniquely the autism spectrum, but my social timing is a lot different than a lot of other people, and so that played into it as well. Things I learned to accept and actually value in myself now, but the experience of feeling on the outside always and confronting that. So as it relates to materialism, I had to answer a question to myself mostly, but first to a professor in a university class, Nasser. If anyone knows who Nasser is, he asked me some really, really hard questions. And the first one, when I asked him about how do we deal with material, anyway, I knew I needed to deal with this issue in my life and my relationship with material possessions. He asked me to not to worry about the things in my life, but to understand my relationship with things in my life. And that unleashed a lot of things for me. It made me question a lot, and I started to realize that I had no connection with my inner self. That was the point in time. And at the end of my bachelor's degree, after almost 10 years on Risperdal and 4 to 5, I think, years previous on a different antipsychotic medication, I stopped taking the drugs. And what followed was the most difficult 5-year battle of my entire life. And mostly because when I stopped taking the medication, as much as I had been emotions, and it's like if you have dragons in life, sometimes they're bad. Sometimes bad things come and meet you, and sometimes really great things come and meet you. Being on psychiatric medications for me took all of that and numbed it all. I was numb to all of it, the good and the bad. And when I stopped taking the medications, everything came. It was like an onslaught. And so I guess I would like to say quickly as well is that I made the decision to do this with no resources. I had no support. I had no professional guidance of any kind other than books that I had been put on my radar by angels that had helped me to find my way to this decision. And I want to say, because I feel very, not responsible, but recognizing the enormity of this transition, that it is very, very dangerous to stop taking antipsychotic medication or psychiatric medications, and it's also very dangerous to take them in the first place. And that is the words of Dr. Peter Breggin, who writes a lot on psychiatric drugs and the impact of them. So just quickly, some of the things I went through. I started to experience a lot of very strange symptoms as I transitioned. As I was going to sleep, I would be jolted awake by what's called a brain zap. This happened for months. As I went to sleep, you know, kind of you go to sleep and then you have a jump sometimes, where you're just getting to sleep. Well, that was like the jumping feeling, but I also had, like I was being electrocuted. So that would happen over and over and over at nighttime. So resting wasn't easy. I had a lot of metabolic changes in my body. This particular drug that I took causes diabetes in a lot of cases. My stress responses, my fight or flight was off the charts. I had a lot of stress. And I still have skin problems, which is common. I've met other psychiatric survivors. I still have skin issues and a very big loss of vitality. From a spiritual perspective, and I'm going to wrap this up because I know I'm probably talking longer than, no, okay. So from a spiritual and emotional perspective, all right, get grounded. I had a lot of ups and downs, as I mentioned. But I also had a lot of things that were amazing happen, like subtleties that you wouldn't notice. Like Serge helped us to feel alive. I think if I could explain it in any other way, it was like as alive as I could be, because I hadn't really felt that. So I never even would see clouds, and I can't explain what it does to me to look up to the sky. I live in Albert County, and it's amazing, but I watch the clouds and I feel so full to feel connected to nature in a way that I had never been able to do in the past. So clouds are a big deal. Colors were brighter and experiences were just larger, which helped me to learn self-care, because I needed more rest at that time, and I still do. And an important point for me in this process also is that from the very beginning, I had a strong sense of agency over my decision to stop taking medications for Tourette syndrome. And then, because the solution that was proposed to me often was, maybe you should try an antidepressant. Maybe you should try something. Maybe maybe you've given it a good go, but maybe you should try. And I stood very, very firm in my decision, and my mantra became, if I stay the course, things will get better. And I believed that in a way that I don't quite know how. I just trusted in that belief, and that's how I got to where I am, where I can speak about my experience over actually being in the middle of it and living it. Mindfulness was a big part of how I came to allow healing space from my experience, to allow myself to be here, because this really, as difficult as it sounds, I became a part of the movie, and that was hard. It was hard because it felt a little bit audacious. It felt like daring to put myself there, even if all the things that are awkward, all the things that I've experienced that I tried to tuck away inside, I dared to do it, and it was difficult. And I made a lot of much needed adjustments, like I said. So from a spiritual perspective, I had to practice compassion for myself a lot, and also what that translated to was compassion for other people that I hadn't experienced in the past as well. Because Lisa's right, when you don't have that for yourself, you do end up judging others, and a lot of the experience of feeling so outside was about staying where it felt like that identity of fitting in was going to work. So it was a lot of energy put towards that for me. So feeling disconnected from my experience, I just want to touch really quickly on a couple of really important lessons that I feel like I've learned, and this is why I would like to speak about my experience. I had to learn to advocate for myself. I was really fortunate. I had a great, solid support system behind me, and I had people with good judgment around me while I didn't know who I was or what I was doing, I guess. And I relied on their judgment a lot. But this was my call, and I had to carry it, and I was responsible for the decision, and I had to have faith in my choice. And so that was a big thing. That was a very big step for me. I learned that perfection is great on paper, but practically you have to really listen to and allow the experiences that you have to speak to you, because I believe that comes from a place that it's okay to hurt as well. You don't have to shame yourself for hurting. This is a human experience that we have. And hurting can actually, I guess I learned from mindfulness that giving a little bit of space and recognition and honoring the feelings that you have can take you so much further than trying to negate how you feel and to try to pretend that it's something different. I learned to forgive myself for hurting, and also for not being perfect all the time, and for each interaction that I used to evaluate myself so harshly on. Oh, that one wasn't good. That definitely came across as weird. this one went okay, great, I'm on cloud 9 or whatever. It was a lot of energy trying to be something for each person, when what I really needed to do was to give myself a bit of breathing space and say, I get to be human too, and that gave me the ability to give the same compassion to others. So I guess I just want to wrap it up pretty quick to say that, not to say that there is a type of person that has mental health challenges, but on the outside, I was, previous to this, my experience or who I was would not have come across as someone in distress. I was living and functioning in a way that was very socially, what it's expected, I guess, of a young woman at the time. And I experienced every possible, perhaps in smaller chunks than someone whose symptoms or feelings are exacerbated by other problems. I experienced every level of mental health. I would call it a spiritual emergency. I like the idea of it being a spiritual emergency, that as I transitioned, I went from a world that fit into a tiny little box that I had decided what it was going to be. It was very small. I knew it. It was safe. The things that were by my design, to a wide open space where I was having to decide things that were not so, the limits weren't there anymore. And so as I started to meditate and learn how to honor my experience, I also had to accept that there was a whole world of possibilities. And so that happened as I experienced this spiritual transition. And I don't know if it would have happened. My intention is not to judge or to say anything about anyone else's experience. And I don't know enough to say that drugs can do one thing to one person and not to another person. For me, I sincerely feel that I wouldn't have been able to revolutionize who I am without having had passed through that experience. And so as it relates to mental health and going forward, I'll be connecting with others to try to understand better how we as a community see, experience, and also perpetuate mental illness as a concept. And I'm really interested in it, because before I did this, I would have gone, somebody has mental illness. And I was in a social work program. I was a fixer. I was a solution creator in my mind. That was what my role was going to be. And what I ended up being was like my first client, my first person to work on. And I don't understand or feel the same way about mental health, because I've been through as many symptoms as there are I have experienced. So I feel like we're in a rush to have people heal, and I wish for a world that gives people more space to heal and more places and compassion. And that's it in a nutshell. 15 minutes. That was my shift, my paradigm. And I guess my intention is just to consider that things, okay, I'm going to end with a Krishnamurti quote, and it'll kind of sum up how I feel a little bit and what my intention is for the work, and that is that the description is not the described. And what we call something, or what we tell, what we say, is not the described. It is not the thing. And that the experience, connecting with other human beings, being compassionate, being mindful, standing solid like a tree, and experiencing, welcoming the rain. There's so much more to life than what we would have in our nice, tidy little compartments. And I learned that when I passed through this transition. So thank you for listening.